It's kind of scary to think that that could happen on a movie set.
When and how did you find out about the tragedy?
My mom told me.
What did she say?
She said, your grandmother talked to the people in the production agency and Brandon died. And I just went down next to her and started crying.
With the Crow production in full swing on day 50, the final day with Brandon Lee occurred on the loft set, where they intended to film the scene with Eric and Shelley's flashback demise. It was March 31st after midnight. Though there had been safety issues due to the rush schedule and financial cuts, everything seemed fine. If you don't know what I'm talking about here, it's important you see part 2 of this series to have the full context. Regardless, with the loft set ready to shoot, we need to go over 3 things that were the reason for Brandon Lee's death. The first was where the gun was pointed. I know Jeff told Michael Massey not to point it at him. Now, there are many different accounts to the instruction Michael Massey received about the gun, so let's go over some of them. Some stated Massey was told to point the gun at Lee to get the shot right. The on-set medic, Clyde Basie, stated that Massey had a problem pointing the gun away from Lee for whatever reason. Whatever the case, we can't say what scenario was right or wrong, but what is for sure is that the gun was pointed at Lee, and had it not been, he would most likely be alive today. Now, to understand what happened, you need to know about 2 types of bullets used for the film. The first is a dummy round, which simply put is a bullet that had all its primer and powder removed. This allows the gun's recoil to look real, but since there is no explosion in the chamber, the bullet will not go very far. A dummy bullet will cost double, if not more, than a real bullet, and it was because of this that these bullets were made in the armorer's van, which we covered in part 2. The other round you need to understand is the blank, which is simply a bullet with just powder and primer in it, with no bullet tip. These bullets are often used in films, mainly because they visually look cool when a gun fires. When fired, flame and powder ejects from the barrel, making it look visually real. The .44 Magnum that killed Brandon Lee used both of these bullets, and now we need to get into this. After the bullets were made in the armorer's van, one of the bullets did not have its primer removed. And this bullet was used in a scene exactly 2 weeks before Brandon died. What the crew didn't know was that when the gun fired, since the primer was still active, even though it didn't have powder, it propelled the bullet tip just enough to get stuck in the barrel of the gun, and there it sat. After it was used, it was put back in the van. 2 weeks later, it was pulled out of the armorer's truck for the scene with Brandon Lee. Then, another chance decision occurred that would seal Lee's fate. Proyas wanted to see smoke and flame come out of the gun barrel, and to do this, a blank was used. Unlike a dummy round, remember, a blank has a full charge, so when the primer was hit, the powder exploded out of the barrel. The problem was there was a bullet stuck in that very barrel, and it then became a live round. Then there was the third and most fatal flaw, and that was the armorer on set did not check the sidearm before handing the gun to the actor who knew nothing about guns. It is the most basic act when handling firearms. Had anyone checked that barrel before giving the gun to Massey, it would have been obvious there was an obstruction inside the barrel. It would have been immediately dealt with for safety reasons. Unfortunately, these 3 factors meant Michael Massey now had a lethal prop in his hands. Now, when the scene occurred, Lee walked in the door and was ready for the gunshot to occur. On cue, he would activate the squib and fall forward. Action was called, Lee walked in the room, and everything seemed perfect. Massey fired the gun, the squib went off, but Lee fell backward. The cast of thugs acted joyfully to killing their target, and when cut was called, Lee did not get up. It would be Amata who moved to his friend first, believing Lee was fooling around. but Lee wasn't. At first, Imada felt like Lee might have hit his head from the fall. Then, Clyde Baiss, the set medic, who was once a paramedic, moved to Lee. First, I shook him. I tried it with the verbal stimulation. Nothing worked. Then I tried with the painful stimulation, which would be a sternum rub or a pinch or anything like that, is what it amounts to. Didn't elicit any kind of response, verbally or with motion. He didn't flinch back from it or anything like that. His initial blood pressure was way, way low. Very scary low. Fatally low. Let's put it that way. Yet Clyde saw no blood loss, but he started to remove some of Lee's clothes when he noticed a hole in his t-shirt just below Lee's belly button. He yelled out asking if his t-shirt was supposed to have a hole, and the answer was no. With no powder burns or burning around the entrance hole to Lee, Baiss deducted it was not a squib but something else. He has an abdominal wound. Call 911. Get an ambulance here now and clear the set. But most were too stunned to move. As people left the room, they had to walk right beside Lee and Baiss working to save his life. Some gawked frozen at the event. Alex Proyas slumped to the floor. Immediately, the front gates were informed to keep them open and not to impede any ambulance under any circumstance. They were also told when an ambulance arrived, they needed to point the direction they needed to go. Those who left the stage were shocked, and word spread at the studio that something serious happened on the set. Back on the loft set, Bruce Merlin, who made the homemade dummy rounds, was checking the gun. Meanwhile, Lee's abdomen was swelling. Baiss deduced Lee was internally bleeding. Some were so stunned as they started to leave that they would stop by Lee, gawking in perplexity, while Baiss worked, and that is when Greg Gale came on the set. They were all milling around the door to see what was happening, so I just had nobody was really wanting to listen. Finally, it was just, and I don't yell a lot, but I just said, "Get the hell out of the way! Clear this area. Stay on the side." He did this because some were blocking the only door entering the set, right where Brandon was lying. The person who fired the gun, Michael Massey, sat on the bed in a daze, watching Lee turn pale and his lips turn blue. To combat this, Clyde Baiss began an emergency tracheotomy to induce breathing. During the tracheotomy, a gun went off in another room. The people responsible for the gun actually tested it to figure out if something was wrong with the gun while Lee was dying, and Baiss was fighting to keep Lee alive. When the paramedics arrived, Baiss said they needed to set up IVs, and up to this point, Lee had not regained consciousness from the moment cut was called. Within minutes, Lee was rushed to the hospital, while the set was locked down. When Lee was sent to the hospital, many of the crew followed and waited to hear word of their star. Little Rochelle Davis was still waiting in her trailer for them to find her harness to return to the set and film the dangling scene. Then a costume lady came in her trailer asking what she was doing in there. "Well, I'm waiting to go back on stage." "Nobody's going back on stage. Brandon got shot. Didn't you hear about this?" Rochelle was then sent to the hospital too, while producer Robert Rosen was supposed to communicate with everyone who wasn't there about what happened. He said he contacted Brandon Lee's fiancé and main producer Ed Pressman, as well as his lawyer, but this did not seem fully true, because when Jeff Imada called Brandon's fiancée, Eliza Hutton, about an hour or so later, she knew nothing about Brandon's situation. She thought it was an April Fool's joke, but Imada just said you should definitely get on a plane. It was around this time that the prop man Daniel Kuttner, who was one of the two who made the dummy rounds in the van and one of the prop men in charge of guns, came up to Chunky Hughes, who was the key grip of the film. Daniel told me in a flood of tears that if anything happened to Brandon, I've killed him. I didn't check the gun. I didn't check the gun. I didn't check it. And I went, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Second unit had the gun." And I said, "How long ago was that?" He said, 2 weeks ago. I said 2 weeks ago? I said 2 weeks and you haven't checked it? Oh God, total incompetence. Lee went into surgery at 4 a.m. after they discovered that the bullet had entered his front abdomen under the belly button. After passing through organs, it cut an artery before stopping at his spine. The artery was very important as it fed blood to both his legs, and it was critical. Brandon's mother, Linda Caldwell, and his sister Shannon were informed about Lee's situation at this time and were immediately put on a plane from Los Angeles. When Bruce Lee's fiancée, Eliza, arrived, only she and Lee's best friends, Jeff Amata, and Lee's longtime stunt double, Jeff Cadente, was allowed to see him. They were told he likely would not make it, and by 1 p.m., he was announced dead.
Actor Brandon Lee, 28, died at 1:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday at New Hanover Regional Medical Center.
By the time Lee's mother and sister arrived to the airport, Mata and Eliza met them there to tell them Brandon Lee was dead.
Son of late martial arts star Bruce Lee has died.
It was here
27-year-old
Studios in
Brandon Lee
Wilmington,
was
North
killed during a
Carolina,
movie
that actor
set.
Brandon Lee was filming The Crow.
The news was quickly leaked to the media, and it became a big issue for the crew because outlets could make money from this, and somehow someone inside the production leaked information about all the cast and crew. It was unbelievable. Geraldo was on the phone to me. It was unbelievable. Everybody was phoned. Somebody on that crew had leaked to the media a crew list with everybody's phone numbers. Media would camp outside crew homes. Threats were given to the press to back off, but the media were salivating, and some were offered money.
Look, just let me ask you whether it's going to be criminally negligent homicide or not.
But not many sold out. They just didn't want to relive the shocking events they just witnessed. But that didn't stop fellow actors and acquaintances of Lee from cashing in or exploiting the situation to get in the limelight.
He had premonitions that he wouldn't live past. Sometimes, if I remember, he didn't think he'd live past 25. He thought that he was, very similar to Jim Morrison or James Dean.
A perfect example of this was Steven Seagal, who stirred the pot.
So something is terribly, terribly wrong here. And either, somebody's trying to murder him or there's some kind of gross negligence.
There were others like David Carradine who did a special series for hard copy. It's a good bet Carradine meant well, but of course the organization would edit the video. And throughout it, theories about the Lee curse were repeated. And to punctuate such moments, the editors decided to use John Carpenter Big Trouble in Little China score tracks to manipulate the audience.
Brandon died from a gunshot fired while filming a movie most people thought would launch Brandon to Hollywood stardom and perhaps dispel what some people called the curse of the Lee family name.
Anyone who had an opinion, right or wrong, was thrust in front of the camera. Even gun experts who weren't on the set, nor had access to what really happened. And this was put on televisions across the country as factual news.
The ammunition was not prepared in the normal way with a load crimper. It was loaded with hot glue. And something like this could be the reason that the slug was left in the cylinder when they thought they had emptied all of the rounds, the dummy rounds.
It was sensationalism at its best. But most of the people that knew what was going on intimately didn't want to talk about their sorrow over what they witnessed and the film they were part of that led to his death. So the media went crazy about the curse of Bruce Lee and his son Brandon Lee. Media helicopters flew outside Robert Rosen's office window just to film the producer. Finally, it was decided to hide the film that had Brandon Lee's official death on it to keep it safe. But the truth was, the entire film itself shut down and folks were sent home. The makers of the movie decided to let the Lee family decide what to do with the film. If they decided to release it, they would. If they said no, they would shelve it. There were, of course, those who insisted the film be made to honor what Lee tried to do, and that was to show his performance and how much of a star he really was. In the end, the death was deemed an accidental death, and no charges were brought forth. There were safety fines to the film studio, around $84,000, and Linda Lee Caldwell was paid a large sum for her son's death. Yet there were more that were affected by Lee's death, and these were the unseen, that were not part of the media apparatus, nor part of the production crew. It was the fans of the Crow comic who identified with the material based on early images, and they had a very personal level that connected them to the idea of this film, and they wanted to see it realized. And to return and talk about that is Christopher Moonlight.
Before The Crow was a movie, it was pretty obscure, even in goth circles. The fans that I knew were all such because I had introduced them to the comic with great enthusiasm. But beyond that, it was something that we were really looking forward to because we felt like this was a great piece of work that came from our culture. So to hear that Brandon Lee had been killed while making it was pretty devastating to us because we had heard that he was really looking forward to presenting this to the world. He felt this was a worthwhile story. Of course, we were first and foremost sad that somebody died making it. We put human life above all else in that manner. But when we heard that his fiancée and his mother also believed in this movie and felt it meant so much to Brandon Lee that it should be seen and it should be finished, we were all for that. We really began to get behind the idea that this movie could be finished and it could both present what we loved about the comic and preserve a legacy of somebody who was enthusiastic about something that we were enthusiastic about. So, we really, at that point, became invested beyond just, we want to see this comic. We wanted to see Brandon Lee's performance, and we wanted to see something that represented our culture come together and, be its own thing, become its own thing. That is more than just a movie, and in a lot of ways, it succeeded in that. So, to this day, it's something that matters so much to so many, and I think Brandon Lee would be really happy to know that he created something that did that.
After a short time, the Lee family wanted the film to be released, since Brandon was so enthusiastic about the film and shared that with them. When reshoots occurred, almost everyone came back for Brandon, but it was not easy. It was not uncommon to find people crying alone around corners, and people would walk into them, remembering Brandon and the events that led to his death. Many soldiered on, knowing they were doing it for him. Counselors were available for the crew, but the best consolation they received is that those who returned knew what each other was going through and went forward for Brandon. To help garner awareness for the film, some merchandise was available, but before the movie came out, the main merchandise was the Crow comics, which were more pronounced not only due to the comic fans, but because everyone knew about the tragedy on set thanks to the media, and there was a lot more curiosity towards the periodicals. Apparel hearkening to the film were available, whether t-shirts, necklaces, and even jackets. There were also posters. The Crow also had movie trading cards, which had 100 cards in total to collect alongside 2 chase sets, consisting of 16 cards. And this took me by surprise when doing research for the film, because I'm a big collector of movie trading cards and I don't have this set. I'm making a note to put it in my Christmas list right now. Anyways, March and April of 1994 were really hit and miss at the box office, although there were some really fun films like Greedy, Blue Chips, The Paper, No Escape, Surviving the Game, and The Ref. Nothing left a huge imprint financially in theaters. There were no great successes beyond 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. The week before The Crow was released, on May 6, 1994, 3 films debuted. The first was Clean Slate, with Dana Carvey playing a private eye with amnesia. Robin Williams tried another swing at drama in Being Human, which made only $1.5 million. For the monthly sequel, Three Ninjas kicked back, but not by much in the long run. On May 13th, the successful When a Man Loves a Woman came out with Andy Garcia trying to deal with Meg Ryan's alcoholism. Widow's Peak told the tale of hostilities between widows during 1934, and Spike Lee's Crooklyn also came out, making $13.6 million. When The Crow came out, it was strong, with $11.7 million during its first week in the number 2 spot, just behind When a Man Loves a Woman. During the next week, The Crow would remain in the number 2 spot, gaining more revenue with $14.5 million thanks to word of mouth. The great new comedy Maverick released to the number 1 spot. If you like westerns, I highly suggest checking this one out. It's a lot of fun. Anyways, The Odd Even Cowgirls Get the Blues also came out, with Uma Thurman having huge thumbs to use for her hitchhiking adventures. During The Crow's 3rd week, the summer race really began when Eddie Murphy's Beverly Hills Cop 3 tried to duke it out with John Goodman's The Flintstones. Of course, Axel Foley would lose to Fred Flintstone, and another loser would be Keanu Reeves, trying to be Little Buddha. Due to the top 3 films, The Crow would drop to the 5th spot, making $8 million. By the next week, The Crow would drop again, making $5.9. During that week, The Cowboy Way, Endless Summer 2, and Renaissance Man were released, but 2 big films for the year were also released on June 10th, 1994. City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold, was expected to make serious money, but it reached only $43.6 million domestically on a $40 million budget. The huge surprise was Speed, which dominated, making $121.2 million. During this week, The Crow managed to hang on to the 9th spot, but after this week, The Crow never returned to the top 10. On a budget of $23 million total, the film would eventually make $50.6 domestically, which made it quite successful for the time. A lot of critics praised the movie for Brandon Lee's performance, and that's no surprise because he does such a wonderful job in this film. However, some critics were dead set to hate the film for various reasons, and a perfect example was, of course, my favorite critics, Siskel and Ebert.
But I can't recommend the picture because the story bored me so much, Roger.
Comic books have stories like this, and I think that this is a very daring attempt to film a comic book.
In our final video, we will cover the film itself with details in the film along with production tidbits as we go. We will also have Chris returning with insights, and like our other videos, Brandon Lee should have the last word.
You know, it's interesting how many actors I've spoken with, even ones who've won Academy Awards, and they say every job they have, they feel like it's the last one they're ever going to get.
Yeah. Well, there is no job security in this business. You know, you don't get tenure.
We will see you next time. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps. And sharing helps a lot too. Thanks for watching.